Clayton Kershaw delivered with a great start, and the Dodgers did a little bit of everything offensively for an 8-3 win in Game 1 of the World Series on Tuesday. But the Rays bounced back to even the series at 1 behind Blake Snell, Brandon Lau, and a lineup that started stringing some hits together. Hello, everyone, and welcome into this Thursday, October 22nd edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. As always, we're live streaming here on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports, and all our 110 Network shows are available on demand on the website, on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, and on YouTube. Just search for 110 Sports. So it's the Dodgers taking Game 1, the Rays bouncing back to take Game 2, and we're going to break down what we've learned from these first two games of the World Series coming up here on the show today. Here's a look at today's rundown. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to discuss the series as it's played out so far. Of course, there's not a lot of, huge, broad takeaways that you can have at this point, considering we've had two games and one team has taken each of them. So the simple explanation is, hey, if the Dodgers keep doing what they did in Game 1, they'll keep winning. But if the Rays keep doing what they did in Game 2, they'll keep winning. So it's hard to make any huge sweeping conclusions based on what we've seen, but there are several key takeaways that I think we can have from the first two games of the World Series. So we're going to start by going through, sort of breaking down, since we only have a small two-game sample size, we're going to go through each of the games, but instead of sort of laying out a standard recap style sort of what happened, I have it broken down into some different storylines and takeaways from each of those games. We're going to get into some news and notes. We're going to discuss a little bit about what we've learned in a more broad context from these first two World Series games in the context of what it means moving forward in this series, and that's how we'll wrap up the show with what's on deck. An off day today here in the World Series, the first time this postseason that there's been an off day in the middle of a postseason series. So an off day today, and then we have three games over the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. So we'll preview particularly, in particular, Game 3 coming up tomorrow, and tell you, what's going to be the key for these two teams moving forward. So let's go ahead and jump right in and start by talking about Game 1 in particular. Overall, the story of Game 1 was a little bit of everything, actually, from the Dodgers. There was power, there was speed, there was defense, there was patience at the plate, there was a great start from Clayton Kershaw, there were contributions up and down the lineup. We saw it all from the Dodgers on Tuesday night. They reminded us again how complete of a team that they are with an 8-3 victory in Game 1. And I've got some takeaways here. You'll see them on the screen. We're going to go through them. There's 6 up here. 6 takeaways, and that may seem like a lot from one game, but of course we kind of have to look at this on a micro level, considering we're working with that small sample size. But here's a couple things that I think you should know and we should consider about from Game 1 in particular. Clayton Kershaw was incredible. The narrative has built up for years that Kershaw cannot pitch in October. His numbers are in the postseason are certainly much worse than in the regular season. But he showed in Game 1 of the World Series that he absolutely can, yes he can, deliver on the game's biggest stage. There's really no question about that. Yes, his numbers are worse, but it's not like he has some sort of phobia of the postseason where all of a sudden he freezes up and can't do anything. And this is an incredible future Hall of Famer, and he dominated in Game 1 of this series. He carved through the Rays lineup. He threw 6 innings of 1-run ball with 8 strikeouts. He retired 17 of the final 18 batters he faced. His only mistake, really, was a hanging slider that stayed out over the plate too much, allowing a solo home run to Tampa Bay center fielder Kevin Kiermaier. The Rays hitters missed on 19 of their 38 swings against Kershaw. So that's a 50% whiff rate, and that is the highest of any start in Kershaw's entire career, regular season or postseason. No opponent has had a 50% whiff rate in a game against Kershaw, as in missing on 50% of the swings they took against him. That just shows you how dominant he was. With the exception of that one mistake, Kershaw was incredible. And with his 8 strikeout performance, he moved into sole possession of second in postseason strikeouts all time, overtaking John Smoltz, who, as it would happen, was in the broadcast booth calling the game for Fox. Overtaking John Smoltz, and he now trails only Justin Verlander in postseason strikeouts. Kershaw is also now tied for the 5th most postseason victories of all time with 12. And this next stat is a really interesting one because there's this whole narrative again. Kershaw can't pitch in the postseason. Well, he's tied for the 2nd most postseason games with 8+ strikeouts and 1 earned run or fewer. He's done that 6 times in the postseason. 6 times he's allowed 1 or fewer runs and struck out 8 or more batters. And again, I can't ignore his bad postseason numbers for his career, yes, but it's not as if this narrative is that he just cannot pitch, period, in the postseason. He's just had some really bad outings and can't really make an excuse for that. I'm not trying to explain that away or say that he hasn't struggled in the postseason. But it's not as if this is a guy who just freezes up and can't pitch in the postseason. He absolutely can. And the Athletics' Molly Knight noted something that I thought was interesting when it comes to Kershaw in the postseason. 2020 is the first time in 8 seasons in which Kershaw hasn't been used on short rest or as a reliever in the postseason. And his numbers this postseason are incredible, and that could have something to do, in fact, some sort of a factor into this. He's pretty consistently always been used in the postseason either on short rest or in a relief role, and that has not happened this postseason, and he's 3-1. He has a 2.88 ERA this postseason, 31 strikeouts to just 3 walks in 25 innings. Those are some incredible numbers, and it hasn't been a completely smooth process. He was great he was great in Game 1. He was great in his first start of the postseason against the Brewers in the Wild Card Series. Then he had a meh start and a not good start, but then he has these 2 great starts, so it all balances out to that. But it's an important note here, I think, because maybe that's something that factors into it. The pitching of the short rest, the coming out of the bullpen, that could be something that factors in. We can't know for sure, but what we do know for sure, Kershaw can pitch in the postseason, and even if he goes out and struggles in his next World Series appearance, it's not going to take away from the fact that he can dominate on the game's biggest stage. Another takeaway from Game 1, Mookie was Mookie. The Dodgers' star outfielder Mookie Betts, he did a little bit of everything in Game 1. He once again ignited the discussion about how the Red Sox could have really decided to trade him. Betts went 2 for 4, 2 runs, an RBI, a walk, and 2 stolen bases in Game 1. In the Dodgers' 4-run 5th inning, he walked, stole second, stole third, and then beat a throw home on a ground ball. Corey Seager also swiped a base in that inning in a double steal, marking the first time since the 1912 New York Giants that a team stole 3 bases in an inning in the World Series. Betts also became the second player ever and the first since Babe Ruth with a walk and multiple stolen bases in an inning in the World Series. Betts then hit his first home run of the postseason. In the 6th inning, he became the first player in World Series history with a homer, 2 runs scored, and 2 stolen bases in the same game. There's not much to say about Mookie Betts that hasn't already been said. He's an incredible player. He's a 5-tool player. He's a really smart player. He's a really talented player who can influence the game in so many ways, and he's going to be a Dodger for many years to come, and I don't think any Dodgers fan is upset about that. Mookie Betts was incredible in Game 1 of the World Series. Like I said, his first postseason home run, but he has made an impact in several other ways. He's been doubling. He's got several doubles this postseason, and he's made several highlight reel catches in right field. So That's the thing about Betts, too. Even when he's not hitting home runs or even when he's not stealing bases, there's so many aspects to his game that he's contributing pretty much all the time in some way or another. Another takeaway from game one, the Dodgers got contributions from throughout their lineup. Betts was the offensive MVP for the Dodgers in game one. They also got contributions from several other guys. Cody Bellinger hit a 2-run home run in the fourth to get the scoring started. And then the Dodgers, in their 4-run fifth inning, they had a walk, a double steal, a fielder's choice RBI ground out, an RBI single, and then another RBI single for the scoring. So they had 6 Dodgers: Betts, Bellinger, Max Muncy, Will Smith, Chris Taylor, and Enrique Hernandez. All of them had at least 1 RBI in game one. And this is a Dodgers team, and we talked about it. We talked about it on Tuesday. We've talked about it before. It's the best offense in baseball for a reason, because not only can they hit the home run at any point from pretty much any guy, they can also string together these series of hits. Single, walk, RBI ground out, double steal. If they can string together these hits and have these big offensive innings, whether it be from 2 or 3 home runs hit in an inning or 4 or 5 hits thrown together within a span of a couple outs in an inning. And that's what makes this Dodgers team so threatening offensively. There were also a couple of key defensive plays for the Dodgers in game one. Justin Turner, a diving stop in the 6th. Dodgers reliever Victor Gonzalez snagged a hot shot off the bat of Mike Zunino with 2 on and 1 out in the top of the 7th and turned it into a double play. And Cody Bellinger made a leaping grab at the wall on a fly ball off the bat of Austin Meadows in the top of the 9th inning. It's an impressive catch from Bellinger. And that's the Dodgers story. Kershaw, great. Mookie was Mookie. Offensive contributions throughout and some key defensive plays. That's the story for the Dodgers in game one. The Rays, meanwhile, there were some struggles, and they couldn't get things going offensively. They were hardly able to touch Clayton Kershaw in this game. We mentioned that. The Rays did score 2 runs on 4 hits in the 7th inning after Kershaw's exit, but that would not be enough. And game one marked 10 straight games with 8 or fewer hits for the Rays. That was the longest streak ever within a single postseason for a team, and evidence of the fact that they have struggled to string together hits. They've hit some home runs. They've won some games with, a walk, a home run, and then, manufacture 1 run, and it's, 3 runs, and that's enough. They win 3-2, but they've been struggling to string together hits, and that did not change in game one. The 3 runs that the Rays scored, the Rays scored in game one of the World Series was actually more than the Astros scored in each of the Rays' 4 wins in the ALCS. But that's rarely going to be enough against the Dodgers. But the big storyline for me from a Rays perspective of game one, and this is one of the overall storylines that I'm watching the rest of the way, was that Kevin Cash, Rays manager, abandoned the pitching formula that has got his team to where it is. And they've used it all season, all postseason in particular. It's the pitching approach of not being afraid to pull starters early with regularity. They used it in Game 7 of the ALCS. Charlie Morton was pulled in the middle of a gem against the Astros after only 66 pitches. Cash was aware, obviously, of Morton's struggles through the third time through the order, and so he went to the bullpen completely unfazed, and it worked out. They used it in Game 6 of the ALCS as well, with Cash removing Blake Snell in the top of the 5th inning amidst a shutout as well. Snell called the decision frustrating post-game, and yeah, there was some outside criticism, but the Rays clearly don't care. They use a deep and talented bullpen to optimize every single matchup that they can, within reason. And they really don't care about the aesthetics of it. They don't care about pulling a frontline starter in the midst of a gem in the 5th inning. They just don't. But they curiously deviated from that script in Game 1 of the World Series, with Cash giving Tyler Glasnow an unusually long leash against the best lineup in baseball, and it led to a complete unraveling in the fifth inning. Now, Glasnow has incredible stuff, and he had incredible stuff, but he did not have good command on Monday. The two-run home run to Cody Bellinger in this game that he gave up was not the end of the world by any means. But Glasnow was already at 86 pitches and had issued 4 walks entering the fifth inning. And Cash sent Glasnow back out there. That in itself wasn't crazy. But he did not pull him at the first sign of trouble, but rather Cash left Glasnow in after 2 straight walks to face another 3 batters, only taking him out after an RBI single from Will Smith made it 4-1. Ryan Yarbrough was not able to strand the 2 inherited runners, the 2 runners he inherited from Glasnow, who ended up being charged with 6 earned runs in 4 1/3 innings, with 6 walks on a career-high 112 pitches, the most thrown by a Rays pitcher all season. Those 6 walks were the most in a World Series game since Edwin Jackson for the Cardinals back in 2011. Snell also became the first pitcher in MLB history to give up 6+ earned runs and walk 6+ in a World Series game. Now, Cash defended his decision to leave Glasnow in after the game, saying he trusted that Glasnow had the stuff to keep them in the game and that there likely wouldn't have been anyone better equipped to get a key strikeout than Glasnow. And that's fine. I mean, that's kind of, it's what you'd probably expect to hear from a manager there, but there really wasn't any sort of explanation, and not that I really expected one, but no real explanation for why Cash abandoned the system that they've used all season. It was very, very strange. And it wouldn't have been strange if it was a more traditional team and a more traditional manager, and that's just how they did things. But this is deviating from a system that they've had the entire season. And why that was the time to do that didn't make any sense to me. They stuck with the system. They stuck with the system where they had to pull 2 starters in Game 6 and Game 7 of the ALCS who were rolling, really. And they stuck with their system. But when you have a guy who enters the 5th with 4 walks, and then he walks 2 more, and you're still not pulling him, his pitch count's approaching 100, I don't understand that. I don't understand it from just a general approach, but I particularly don't understand it for the Rays, given their system, given how they have succeeded by going to the bullpen quickly. That was a really odd decision, and the Dodgers probably winning Game 1, regardless of whether Snell came out a batter or 2 sooner. But it was a strange variation from the system that's got the Rays here, got them to this point. So I'm going to be paying attention to that the rest of the way, the rest of this World Series, no matter how it turns out. Does Cash make exceptions to their system for other pitchers, or for Glasnow again when he goes back out there for his next World Series start? Or was he just seeing something in that particular circumstance from Glasnow that gave him reason to believe that that was the time to deviate from their system? I don't know, but it certainly did not work in Game 1, and I didn't see a good explanation for it. All right, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, of course, there was another game in this World Series, Game 2, last night. The Rays came back to tie the series at 1 game apiece, and some of those things that we just mentioned that they struggled in Game 1 and had been struggling in, well, they turned it around, particularly offensively. We'll discuss that next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here on a Tuesday, October 22nd, 2020. Let's dive right into Game 2. As the Rays bounced back behind a dominant outing from Blake Snell, as well as a 2-home run game from the previously struggling Brandon Lowe to win Game 2, 6-4. Some of the key storylines in this game, we have to start with Blake Snell, who was the pitcher of the game in yet last night's contest. He struck out 9 batters in 4 2/3 innings, and he took a no-hitter into the 5th inning before giving up a 2-run home run to the Dodgers' Chris Taylor. Snell showed some incredible stuff in this outing. He became the first pitcher since Roger Clemens in 2000 to strike out 9 and allow 2 or fewer hits in a World Series game. Of course, Clemens in his outing went something like 8 innings. Snell 4 2/3. As I should note that the Rays went back to the strategy that had got them there. You know, we just talked about that. They didn't leave Snell in long. They had the quick hook for him after he got into a little bit of trouble in the 5th inning. As makes sense for Snell. He's a guy who hasn't gone 6 innings in a start since July of 2019. Something like that. It might be June. He doesn't go 6 innings much, and they're not afraid. He's had some previous health issues. The Rays often have a quick hook for him. But that doesn't mean his outing was any less dominant. Of course, he didn't give them as many innings, but 4 2/3 innings, 9 strikeouts. He really set the tone for the Rays to win 6-4 last night. The other player we have to talk about is Brandon Lowe, who he was the best hitter for the Rays this season. He smacked 14 home runs in the 60-game season. He hit about 270. But he had cooled off down the stretch, and he was really struggling this postseason. He had 1 home run, but he was hitting just 107 during the playoffs entering last night. But the team and Kevin Cash, they stuck with him. He was in last night's lineup, batting second. He wasn't even moved down deep in the lineup, and it paid off. As Lowe hit an opposite field solo home run at the top of in the first inning, off of Tony Gonsolin to put the Rays on top for the first time in the World Series. And that gave the Rays their 27th home run of the postseason, which tied a Major League record for most home runs by a team in the postseason. In the 5th inning, Lowe hit another opposite field shot. This coming after he had no opposite field home runs all regular season. He hit a second in this game in the 5th inning, and that made it 5-0 Tampa Bay. And at that point, Lowe had 2 home runs, Snell a great outing. And that home run gave the Rays sole possession of the record. Most home runs hit by a team in a single postseason, 28, the 2020 Tampa Bay Rays. Now, should note, the Rays had more opportunities to hit these home runs in this wild card series round. There's just more games in this postseason, but still a remarkable achievement, especially the Rays getting to it here in just Game 2 of the World Series. Lowe was the offensive MVP of Game 2 for the Rays, but the club also very notably had 8 hits aside from his 2. One thing to talk about here for the Rays offensively, aside from Lowe, in the 4th inning, Dodgers second baseman Kike Hernandez, he botched an inning-ending double play ball, and that opened the door for Tampa Bay third baseman Joey Wendell to deliver with a 2-out, 2-run double into the gap. That gave the Rays a 3-run lead. Of course, Lowe homered again. Wendell picked up another RBI in the 6th inning on a sac fly for the Rays' 6th run of the game. And that's a really notable development, that the Rays were able to string together some hits and capitalize on a Dodgers mistake. The Dodgers aren't going to make many mistakes, but if you're the Rays playing the best team in baseball this year, you've got to capitalize on any mistake your opponent makes, and you got to be able to string some hits together. We've talked about it. The Rays have been unable to do that for a lot of the recent postseason, at least. They've relied on the home run, which has served them well, but it makes for a tricky, and like we talked about on Tuesday's show, it limits your avenues, the variety of your avenues to win. But we saw them string together hits in Game 2, and that's really notable from their perspective, because if Lowe is turning a corner here, breaking out of a slump, I mean, sometimes you have 2 home run games, and then it doesn't really mean much. But if he's turning things around, if he's getting on track, and that's going to be something we see better performance from him the rest of the way, that's significant in its own right. And then if you get this Rays lineup and they're starting to be able to string together hits with Lau and Wendell, and you get Ji-Man Choi hitting well, and Rosarena keeps hitting, all of a sudden you've got a team that's able to string together hits, maybe put together some big innings. Because if they're not able to do that, like we've talked about, then they got to hold the Dodgers to just a couple of runs. But if they can string together hits, if they can have some of these bigger innings, then that gives them a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more of an opportunity to win games by a score of 6-4 instead of 3-2. So that gives them that's something that could be key for them moving forward. The Rays are now 19-0 this season, regular season and postseason, when scoring 6+ runs, the only undefeated team in Major League Baseball under those circumstances. Should also note the Rays struck out just 7 times last night in Game 2. That's not a tiny number, but they'd averaged 11 strikeouts per game over their last 10 contests. So making more contact from their perspective, more frequent contact, fewer strikeouts, again, plays into this idea that the Rays could, if they're able to keep that up, have some of these bigger innings and string hits together and give themselves more paths to victory. Next takeaway here, the Dodgers did make this interesting in Game 2. The Rays, as we mentioned, a 5-0 lead at one point. The Dodgers were able to make things interesting, but they came up short of a comeback late in this game. Chris Taylor had that 2-run home run in the 5th off of Blake Snell. Will Smith, the Dodgers catcher, homered in the 6th inning. And Corey Seager homered in the 8th inning. More on him in a minute. But 6-4 is as close as they could get. Diego Castillo came on for the final out to pick up his 3rd save of the postseason. Other thing you have to talk about from the Dodgers' perspective is they essentially went with a bullpen game, and it did not work out. They went with Tony Gonsolin to start Game 2, saving Walker Buehler to avoid. He could have started in Game 2, but it would have been on short rest. They decided they'll go with him Game 3, and they start Tony Gonsolin in Game 2. But he only got through an inning and a third. He gave up that Lau first home run, and then they pulled him. Very quick hook for Gonsolin, who was essentially an opener for a guy who's young, who doesn't have much experience as an opener. Very quick hook for him. And then Dave Roberts eventually used 6 other pitchers in relief of Gonsolin. 3 of them gave up at least 1 earned run. The worst outing was from Dustin May. He was charged with 3 earned runs on 4 hits in an inning and a third. May and Gonsolin, 2 of the Dodgers' young pitchers that have helped them be able to continue to succeed on the pitching side of things, despite losing Hyunjin Ryu, despite losing Kenta Maeda. They've lost some of these veteran pitchers who've been huge for them, but they continue to be a great pitching team because of young pitchers like May and Gonsolin, who combined to post a 2.46 ERA during the regular season. But in the postseason, they've combined to pitch to a 7.02 ERA. The Dodgers are going to need them to do better the rest of the way, and Dave Roberts, Dodgers manager, said post-game on the pair, on May and Gonsolin, he said, according to the Associated Press, "I still trust them, I still believe in them, and they've just got to make pitches. They're still going to need to get big outs for us," and that is certainly true. Because there's Kershaw, there's Buehler, there's Urias, but there's not a ton of other, they're going to need big outs from these guys, like Robert said. So that's going to be something to monitor moving forward. Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin, can they get it figured out? Because part of it could be they're being used in roles they're not used to, and maybe they're struggling with that. But that's going to be something to keep an eye on moving forward the rest of the series. Also have to talk about Corey Seager. His incredible postseason has continued. As I mentioned a moment ago, he homered in the 8th inning of Game 2 last night. And that tied him with Randy Arozarena for the MLB lead in home runs this postseason with 7. It also gave Seager a new record for the most home runs hit by a shortstop in a single postseason with 7. We've talked so much about Arozarena. He's been this big storyline. He's been this big breakout, and that's certainly deserved attention. But Corey Seager has been having an incredible postseason. Most home runs hit by a shortstop in a single postseason. We still got a couple games to go at the very least in this World Series. Seager completely locked into the plate. He's hitting .302 with an OPS close to 1,200, 7 homers, 16 RBI, and he also has 2 steals for good measure. So those are some of your Game 2 takeaways. A couple of other items, just sort of smaller items I wanted to tack on here talking about Game 2. First is Randy Arozarena. He singled in the 9th inning yesterday, his first hit of yesterday's game, to tie Derek Jeter for the most hits by a rookie in a single postseason with 22. Also, Randy Arozarena now ranks second in total bases by a player in a single postseason ever. As in, only one player has ever had more total bases in a single postseason. And that's David Freese in 2011 for the Cardinals. Freese had 50 total bases in that postseason in 2011. Arozarena is currently at 48, so he just needs 3 bases to become the player with the most total bases in a postseason ever, which is just incredible, just remarkable. This coming from a rookie that most people didn't know a thing about a couple months ago. Other quick item to hit on here, Tampa Bay first baseman Ji-Man Choi became the first Korean-born player to ever record a hit in a World Series when he singled to lead off the 6th inning of Game 2. Sticking with the Rays, their reliever Nick Anderson, he was one of the best in baseball during the regular season. He posted a 0.55 ERA. But Anderson has really struggled in this postseason, particularly of late. He's posted a 4.85 ERA in the playoffs, and he's given up at least 1 earned run in 5 straight appearances, including last night. Anderson gave up just 1 home run in 19 regular season appearances. He's now given up 3 home runs in 8 postseason appearances. So he seems to have lost it right now, and that's not to say that he can't get things turned around in a hurry. He is one of the best relievers in baseball. But he just doesn't have it right now. And that's not devastating for the Rays, considering the amount of options that they have that Kevin Cash is willing to go to in late innings. But it is becoming a situation where, are they going to trust him in high leverage roles moving forward to the World Series? I feel like right now he's probably got to prove it. He's probably got to go out there in a less high leverage role and show that he can get it done before they're willing to stick him back in there in the big situations, whether those big situations are closing out a game with a 1-run lead in the 9th inning or coming on in a big situation in the 5th or 6th inning, as they've done with him some this postseason. He's been their best reliever this year, but it wasn't that he was their set designated closer all the time. He was their closer a lot of the time, but he also came in high leverage situations in the 7th, and the 6th, and the 8th. So it'll be interesting to see how they use him moving forward. I feel like at this point they're probably going to have to move him down in the pecking order in terms of guys who they're willing to trust for high leverage situations. There are several other guys. That's what makes this Rays team so good. One of the aspects of it is that it's not a situation where, oh no, we have the star closer and he's falling apart. What are we going to do in the later innings? We're lost. Because they just have so many guys who they can throw out there. They had so many guys who got saves this year. Like they don't care about the closer's tag and, oh no, has this guy pitched in the 9th before? Like, they're going to go with who they think can get them the outs, and they don't care about the traditional roles. That's true in the starter side of things. We talked about that. That's also very, very much true in the bullpen. But again, the point of this point, Nick Anderson, incredible reliever, but he continues to struggle in the postseason. All right, so that's what you need to know from Game 2, and that's where we are right now. Again, sort of your summary. Dodgers win Game 1, 8-3. Kershaw was great. Mookie was Mookie. Dodgers had offensive contributions throughout. The Rays offense couldn't get things going. And the Rays deviated from their normal pitching plan. They left Tyler Glasnow out there a lot longer than they usually would. Game 2, the Rays bounced back. Blake Snell was great. Brandon Lau breaks out of his slump. Dodgers can't come back, their pitching carousel doesn't work out, and Corey Seager continues to do awesome things. And so that's where we're at right now. Coming up in just a little bit here on the show, in like 10 or so minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about what that all means for the rest of the series, what we've learned. And the answer is, give you a little preview, is the answer is a lot of it is we don't really know yet. It's such a small sample size. But we will discuss that coming up. But first, I do want to get into some news and notes. We usually get to these a little bit earlier in the show, but wanted to give you the full breakdown of the World Series, 2 games we've had so far. But here are some news and notes for you. In an interview with the Associated Press just hours before the start of Game 1 of the World Series, MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred said he wants to keep the expanded playoffs and the extra innings rule beyond this season. So let's start with the expanded playoffs, because this is something we've talked about here on the show several times, and that Manfred has talked about several times in recent weeks. Now, he made it very clear. He said, he had to watch his words because of how some of the comments, some of the way the comments he's made have come across in recent weeks about this issue. He does not think that the 16-team format, exactly as it came to be for this season, will likely remain moving forward, which is a good thing, because he made these initial comments about wanting to keep the expanded playoffs, and people freaked out because it was like, oh no, we can't have 16 teams, and I agreed with that. I mean, we can't have 16 teams. We can't have if we have 16 teams, we certainly can't have it be the kind of system of seeding and whatnot like we had this year. But it's very clear now, Manfred's not advocating for that exactly, for exactly what we have this year. In part, he cited, they want to preserve the importance of the regular season. We talked about that. That's really important. That makes sense. But he did say he thinks expanding beyond the 10 teams that we've had in recent years in the playoffs would be a good change. And as I've said before, I am on board with that concept of, I'm not against the idea of expanding the playoffs beyond 10 teams. I don't think 16 is good, and I think they need to make sure that there are incentives put in place for teams to win their division, and that you're not rewarding I don't think you should have sub 500 teams in there very often, and we had 2 of them in there, so that's part of the reason we can't have 16 teams. But also, I think there needs to make sure that there's a system to make sure we're rewarding the teams, whether it's you're rewarding all the division winners or you're rewarding the 2 division winners with the best record in each league, with the bye or something, whatever it is. But it seems like Manfred is in the right direction, in the right state of mind, at least with lining up with my opinion on that, I should say. Now, as for the extra innings rule, that of course was the change for this season, with the base runner placed on second base to start every half inning in extra innings. It's something they've been doing in the minors for a couple of years. And Manfred said he wants that to remain. He said, I think the players like it. I think it's really good from a safety and health perspective that keeps us from putting players in situations where they're out there too long or in positions they're not used to playing. And this is something that heading into the season, the extra innings rule, something I said that I'm against, but I'm okay with it during the regular season, and I want to see how it plays out. And it's played out. It's played out in the regular season. And I guess I don't have a bold take on it. I'm still not a fan, but I'm not passionately against it. And that's one of those things where I really think, just Manfred's comments alone on this don't mean everything. It doesn't mean just because he wants it that it's going to happen. And so I'm still not a fan of implementing this extra inning, the runner on second and extras, moving forward in regular circumstances. Another thing to consider is that we're probably not going to be in regular circumstances in 2021. And we don't know what level that's going to be, but it's starting to look like it's not going to be a normal 2021 season. Maybe there's some fans in the stands, but not all the fans in the stands, or maybe there's still not many fans. Like, whatever it might be, it doesn't look like next year's going to be normal, so you have to factor that in too. As a rule, though, I still don't like it very much, but I'm sort of to the point where I'm not outraged at the level that I was before about it. So we'll just have to see how that plays out, because there's still a lot of factors to consider there, what next season looks like and whether or not it even gets agreed to at all. Among the other topics that Manfred discussed in his interview with the AP, he said he expressed some concern about whether fans will be able to attend games next season. He also said he was pleased for the rule which he had pushed for to force pitchers to face a minimum of 3 batters or to finish an inning. And then he wouldn't comment on whether he favors keeping the expansion of the designated hitter in the National League moving forward. It's something that's had a lot of momentum in recent years. It was put in place for the shortened season. It's not set in place for anything moving forward past this year. But it seems like it's one of those things that's inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. But it was interesting that Manfred wouldn't comment on whether he favors it. He commented on, of course, a lot of other aspects that changed this year as a result of the special season. But he wouldn't comment on that. And as for any of these changes actually meaning anything or actually taking place or remaining or what might or whatever it might be, Players Association Union head Tony Clark said it was too soon to commit to any changes for 2021. So again, this is all interesting stuff, and what the commissioner of any sport, thinks about these big changes matters. But again, important to note, as we've talked about before, none of these changes are just going to happen because Rob Manfred flips the switch. It's all got to be part of negotiations with the Players Association. They've got one more year on the collective bargaining agreement, and then they've got to get another one in place. So that's going to be something that's going to be a big storyline in the sport for upcoming months and whatnot. So interesting stuff to talk about, but not going to get too upset or excited about any of these changes before we know if there's any momentum to them actually happening. A couple other news items for you here. The proposed sale of 95% of the Mets to billionaire hedge fund manager Steve Cohen has been approved by MLB's ownership committee, and a final approval is expected to take place next month, that according to the Associated Press. The Dodgers' Game 1 win over the Rays in the World Series, it drew a record low TV audience for a World Series game, seen by an average of 9,195,000 viewers on Fox. So that's not great. The lowest watched record low TV audience. That wasn't great to hear. But another way to look at it, though, as this was pointed out, is that Game 1 viewership of the World Series topped Game 1 viewership of the NBA Finals. Both those games were on network TV. Fox for the World Series, ABC had Game 1 of the NBA Finals, and I don't know. I don't have any deeper commentary on that, but it's just one of those things you have to consider the circumstances, the times, and what else is going on. So record low audience for Game 1 of the World Series on TV, but better audience than watched Game 1 of the NBA Finals. Another note for you here, Tony La Russa has interviewed with the White Sox for their managerial opening as expected, and he remains a top candidate. This according to Bruce Levine of 670 The Score in Chicago. The interview process reportedly included pointed questions about La Russa's vision and his readiness to handle the White Sox talented young players. The 76-year-old, I should say, he last managed with the Cardinals, winning a World Series roughly a decade ago, and it's looking like there's a real chance that this happens, but there's still a lot of other candidates that are going to be interviewed. We don't know if this is real, how likely this really is. We'll talk more about this if there's more evidence of it happening. It's a really interesting storyline. I mean, it would be just wild to see La Russa back managing again. It seems just like a strange fit with the White Sox. It really does, but it would certainly be a big storyline if it happens. We'll talk about that more, though, as that situation may develop. All right, we're going to go ahead and take our final break of today's broadcast, though. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about what we've learned from these first 2 games of the World Series. We had takeaways from both these games, but what do I think that this, what does this really mean moving forward? What have we learned, and what's on deck? We'll preview Game 3 a little bit. We'll look forward. We'll look at what's happened in these first 2 games and what it could tell us about the rest of the World Series, and we'll look at Game 3. That's all coming up next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back one final time to this Thursday, October 22nd edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. As I mentioned before the break, we're going to talk a little bit now, just briefly, about what we've learned from the first two games of the World Series. So, went through the takeaways from Game 1 and Game 2, but what does it mean moving forward? Well, it's really hard to say, again, is the honest answer, because right? You can say Dodgers do what they did in Game 1, then they'll keep winning. If the Rays do what they do in Game 2, they'll keep winning. But from the Rays' perspective, we'll start with that. I think we're going to need to see them string together hits like they did last night for them to potentially win this World Series. This is a team that, like we talked about, they've relied so much on the home run, and that's worked for them. But I think that against a team like the Dodgers, I stand by what I said on Tuesday, where if you're not stringing together hits, if you're not scoring enough runs, then it leaves a very small margin of error for the Rays pitchers against the best lineup in baseball. Where even a good outings, a good performance overall from the Rays pitchers still could be 3 or 4 runs given up to the Dodgers. And so the Rays are going to need to score potentially in a lot of these, if they're going to win some of these games, enough of these games, they're going to need to score 4, 5, 6 runs in some of them, like they did last night. So they're going to have to string together hits, and Brandon Lau potentially getting back on track, that would be a huge part of that. So that's what I see from the Rays' perspective. I don't know, from the offensive perspective, that's what they're going to need to do. From the pitching perspective for the Rays, I don't think there's a lot we've necessarily learned. I still don't understand, like I said, what happened with Tyler Glass now in Game 1, why they gave him such a long leash. Doesn't really add up. I think they got to stick to their approach moving forward, but there's not much else to say on that. Blake Snell was great, so just stick with the Rays. Just stick with your approach when it comes to pitching. From the Dodgers' perspective, we just saw it all fall apart when they had that bullpen game yesterday, essentially, from the pitching perspective. But they're in the good situation, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, or I guess we'll talk about it now. They're in the good situation of they're not going to have to turn to the same type of bullpen game in the next few days, the next few games at least. Walker Buehler is going to go Game 3 tomorrow. I mean, he's been their best pitcher. He's their best pitcher now, essentially. He's their young star. He's been incredible this postseason. We'll talk more about him in a minute. So he goes Game 3. Game 4 goes to Julio Urias, who probably is not going to go 6 innings or anything, but he's been great this postseason, and he probably, I think it's very likely he'll give you 2, 3, 4 innings, which is certainly better than what they had going for him last night. And then you've got Kershaw back on the mound in Game 5. So that's a situation the Dodgers aren't going to find themselves in again, most likely, what we saw last night again, for at least a little while. So that's good from their perspective. From an offensive perspective from the Dodgers, I don't think we've really learned all that much. We've seen them string together hits. We've seen them hit home runs. We've seen how great this offense is. But it's not a perfect offense. They've got some guys who are slumping a little bit. But I don't think there's a ton you can take away from the Dodgers' perspective there. It's tied at 1, and there's not a lot else to say on that. I know it seems like I should have a hot take, whoever, the Rays prove they can do, I feel like I don't want to have a too strong of a reaction. I saw columns after Game 1 that were like, could a series be over after one game? Well, the Dodgers have just done that with their Game 1 win. They're such a complete team. They've won it. It's basically over. They've won the World Series. It's like, okay, calm down. The Rays come back to tie it last night. Now, I'm not turning the other direction and saying, wow, the Rays pitching, I think they're going to win it after all, and Brandon Lau is fixed, and here we go. The Rays are gonna do this. I don't think you can react too strongly either way. You just can't. It's 2 games. So I don't think we've learned a ton, but those are a couple of things I think we have learned. As for what's on deck, and talking a little bit more specifically about Game 3, of course, as I mentioned, day off today. First time this postseason, we've got off days in the middle of postseason series. It's nice to be able to have a day to kind of reset and take a look at what's happened and take a look forward. I'm sure it's nice for the players, at least in most cases, unless they really are just itching to get out there. because they're hot at the plate or whatever. But it's nice to have a day to reset in the World Series. It was because it's been such a crazy postseason with the amount of games that were played with the wild card series round, and just so many games, so many series going on at the same time, and no off days. And so it's nice a little bit now to have this day off to reset. And then we'll have 3 straight games over the weekend. Games 3, 4, and 5 will be on Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night, as the Rays shift to being the home team for those 3 games. Of course, they're staying in Arlington, Texas, the Rangers' new stadium, but it'll shift to the Rays shifting to be the team that bats in the bottom of the innings. Game 3 tomorrow night, it'll be Walker Buehler against Charlie Morton. It's an interesting matchup because you got Buehler, who's 26, Morton, who is 36 years old. So big difference there, but there are actually a lot of similarities between them. Both Buehler and Morton struggled some during the regular season. Both have been outstanding this postseason. Both will be pitching on extra rest. Buehler is 1-0 with a 1.89 ERA in 4 starts, 29 strikeouts in 19 innings. He threw 5 2/3 scoreless in Game 7 of the in Game 6 of the NLCS. I had my players mixed up there. Morton, meanwhile, he's 3-0, a 0.57 earned run ERA in 3 starts. He threw 5 2/3 scoreless in Game 7 of the ALCS. And according to MLB.com's Sarah Langs, the Game 3 winner in a best-of-7 postseason series, which is tied at 1, has gone on to win basically 70% of the time. So, from a statistical, historical perspective, the team that wins Game 3, 70% chance of winning the series. But, look, I don't know how much you do with that. Again, it's the overall odds, but it's not like it's 99% or anything. The Dodgers will go on to pitch, as I mentioned, Julio Urias in Game 4, Kershaw in Game 5. It's not clear what the Rays' pitching plan is after Morton in Game 3. They could go to a bullpen game in Game 4, or maybe they'd throw Ryan Yarbrough out there again. But after that, for 5, 6, 7, you'd expect it to be back to Glasnow and Snell, and then Morton again if necessary. So unless if we have a sweep, if we have a team that sweeps the weekend, then the World Series will end on Sunday. Assuming that's not the case, Monday will be an off day, and then it'll be back for Game 6 and potentially a Game 7 on Tuesday and then Wednesday. So if we have a team win Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, whether it be the Rays or Dodgers, the World Series will end then, and we'll come back on Tuesday, and we'll talk about it then. We'll break things down on Around the Bases. But if it's not a team sweeping the weekend, then we will have a Game 6 at least on Tuesday night, and we'll be getting you ready for that and breaking down what's happened over the weekend. That'll be Tuesday's show. So either way, we'll be back with you here on Tuesday on Around the Bases to break everything down. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Around the Bases. Make sure to check out 110sportsmedia.com for all of our latest written content. I'm going to have a story up on the website breaking down some observations, much like we've talked about today from the first 2 games of the World Series. But also make sure to check out all the other content that's up on the website. Josh Molenix is doing a draft preview from the NBA. We've got soccer coverage from Josh Doring up there. And make sure to subscribe to the 110 Sports newsletter. You can do that on the right side of the homepage at 110sportsmedia.com. And you'll get the latest coverage, the latest written articles, links to our shows and everything delivered to your inbox every Friday morning. Make sure to check out our live coverage continuing tomorrow with Josh Molenix back with his show at 11 a.m. Eastern, and then again on Monday at the same time. Josh Doran will be back with Touchline Talk on Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And then, like I said, one way or another, of whether the World Series is over or we're headed to a Game 6, we'll be back to break down wherever things stand on Around the Bases on Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. But that's going to, again, do it for today's episode of ATB Live. I'm Chris Brown. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again on Tuesday.